Welcome everybody to Kinesiology 320, Theory of Physical Education. Um, and in this presentation, I'm actually recording it while I'm on the train, so you may hear a lot of background or ambient noise of conversations or train sounds, and I apologize for that, but it's just what I do because I care. And so in this presentation, I first of all just want to go through a quick listing of some qualities of a good physical education teacher, and then just give you a brief history on the development of physical education. So going through this list, and these are some things that I've compiled over the years that have been helpful in identifying what good teaching or a good teacher, what qualities a good teacher possesses. So the first one is setting high expectations for all the students. And we talked about this a little bit before. Regardless of what your students seem to be capable of, just setting good high expectations for them is beneficial. And this is a tough balance because you have so many different levels of performance and abilities in your classroom. Being able to set high expectations that are achievable, that are not outside of the student's reach, is a tough balance. And so you figure this out with time, but good teachers are able to do that. Also, good quality physical educators always have a clear goal, clear written objectives, clear understanding of what they want to accomplish personally and professionally, as well as what the students should be able to accomplish. And this is conveyed in student-friendly language as well. And so not only does the teacher have a good understanding, they're able to communicate this to the students. A good teacher is well organized. They plan, also planning for the unexpected. So what things can you do on rainy days, on those days in which something may happen, minimum days, picture days, those things we talked about that influence instructional time. What are some things that you can do during that time that still makes the most of your instructional physical education time? And so good teachers always organize, they always plan, and they always prepare for that unexpected. Number four, a good teacher, quality physical education teacher, knows how to engage all the students. They look at the students, they evaluate performance well, they know how to provide modifications and challenges, so they are not just providing them with the general sports skill expectation, but being able to move the student from one level of performance to the next. And so you're challenging the students once they begin to show some proficiency in a particular skill, and you're able to enhance that through some modifications of activities. Also, forming strong positive relationships with students and parents. Unfortunately, a lot of teachers I know dread back to school night or dread speaking to parents, and I've always valued that time because you get to know a lot about the student based on the parents' behavior and how they interact with the parents, and this can help you better instructionalize the lessons that you have so that students can improve. So you have a good understanding of what makes the student work and what's going to motivate the student. And that goes a long way. In addition to that, formulating a bond with the parent gives you additional support, so the parent can help you in your classroom, whether it's in the class or whether helping the student outside of class, but the parent can help support you in your goals and your expectations of the student as well. A good physical educator is a master of their subject matter, and this doesn't mean that you have to really go through school, major in kinesiology to become a good physical education teacher. It's just having that desire to investigate, to research, to find out what are some of the good things that you can do in a classroom that is going to be able to teach and motivate and excite your students. And so mastering not only the subject matter of physical education, but really understanding what motivates a student, what makes them tick, is going to be a beneficial quality to have. A good teacher desires to improve. I know a lot of teachers who think they have all the answers, who think they know everything, and they're stagnant in their development. They're stagnant in their teaching, and students typically don't learn much in their classrooms. But a good teacher realizes that there's always room for improvement personally and professionally, and works hard to do that. A good teacher always provides meaningful feedback, and this is key to what we call quality physical education. And so being able to observe a particular performance and understand what's wrong with that performance, and then informing the student what's wrong with that performance, will help them to improve. And so being able to give that quality feedback means not only do you have to understand what the student's doing and have those clear goals and expectations, but it means you have to be able to articulate things in student-friendly language, so you are helping the student to understand how to improve and why to improve in any particular movement, not just a sports skill, but just movement in general. So that's that skill performance that we focus on. A good teacher has that passion, purpose, and reason for being in the profession. If you're just in the profession for a paycheck, then this is just sacrificing the education of the students. And so you really need to, I mean, if you're in this classroom, first of all, you have that passion, or you should have that passion. But sometimes you don't realize that this is not the profession for you until you get into it. But as long as you do really enjoy that time with students and really do value their education, you have that passion. And then you have that purpose. Your purpose is there to instruct and provide that good quality instruction for those students, because no one else is going to give it to them. Sometimes they don't get it at home. Sometimes they don't get it in other classrooms. But being that one teacher that the students can trust and the students respect, the fact that you are there, that you care for them, you have passion, you not only want them to learn, you want them to grow personally, goes a long way. A good teacher treats students as consumers of knowledge. You have to approach it as if you have this treasure, this vat of knowledge that the students really need to have and that they want. And this is also tough to do, because you have to teach your class in a way that makes the students feel like what you are telling them is important, and how you help them to make the application between classroom activities and outside personal life activities is important as well. And so treating the students as if they really need this knowledge, they really need this information, they really need this skill development that you're providing for them is important to do. Also, a good teacher knows how to listen, knows how to ask appropriate questions, and is responsive and understanding to the students. Sometimes students will say things that have an underlying meaning, and being able to listen to that underlying meaning and understand what the student is really trying to say. For example, some students will say an activity is dumb or it's stupid, but what they're really saying is, I don't know how to participate in this, or I don't know how to do that, or I don't feel comfortable. And so a good teacher knows how to listen and understands that, and then starts to ask questions in which engages the student in a conversation to understand their position and why they're saying what they're saying and doing what they're doing. And so being able to listen to the students, being able to hear that hidden message, being able to ask those questions, and then being understanding to the students' needs is a good quality. Good physical education teachers, they don't have a fixed agenda. They go in with an idea of, this is what I want to do, but it's not, this is my way or the highway. It's not, I want all these students to become athletes, or these students are going to have to bend to my will, or I want to whip them into shape, or I want to be a disciplinarian. You can't have that fixed agenda, because students are flexible, and so the teacher has to be flexible as well. There are going to be times in which you'll find yourself struggling with students in a variety of personality conflicts, skill conflicts, and so it's important that you as a teacher are flexible and understanding to that. A good teacher simply has style and personality. Bringing your own spin to an activity, to a game, to a lesson is important, because it allows students to see you in a different light. And so bringing in your own style, your own personality, your own way of doing things allows the students to be a little bit more comfortable when it comes to interacting with you. And it's not that you're going in to try to be a friend to the students, but it's that you're showing the students that you're human, and not only do you make mistakes as well, but you enjoy what you do. A good teacher is reflective, meaning that, and I spoke about this before in class, meaning that you can look back on an activity or a lesson that has been done, and you are looking for ways to improve. You're looking for more opportunities to learn personally and professionally, so that you can better benefit your students. A good teacher is humorous, and I can tell you tons of stories that some students will do things that are inappropriate, but sometimes you just have to laugh, and you have to learn to move on from that. But being able to laugh at those situations is important. Students are funny. Kids are going to be funny at all different levels. There are going to be things that happen that sometimes you can't help but laugh at, and students want to know that you do have a sense of humor, that you're not this uptight Marine that you're coming in to try to really change these students' behavior and mindsets. But once again, it goes back to being human, having your personality, having your own style, and having that sense of humor. A good teacher, of course, cares for the students. They understand why they're there to nurture, to help develop their minds and the talents and skills and abilities of the students. Sometimes kids are in a position where they don't think they need to learn. And as a teacher, once again, going back to that consumer of knowledge thing, you really have to sell what you have, your knowledge, your skills, your talent, your abilities to the student so that they feel they need those things as well. A good teacher demonstrates effective leadership. And this is a tough one for many teachers because some people think leadership means demanding respect. But a good leader just knows how to organize, knows how to manage, knows how to socialize with the students to really get to the end goal or the end result, which is learning for those students. And so being able to demonstrate and understand effective leadership is a key quality to possess. Number 18, a good teacher understands the importance of teamwork and collaboration. We don't have all the answers. You won't have all the answers. It's important to build a network of support. So asking other teachers, asking administration, bringing in the parents, understanding that working together to the benefit of the students is important. And then a good quality physical education teacher knows how to have fun. They really enjoy what they do, and I complained a few times when I was a teacher as well. There are going to be times where you're just unhappy, you don't want to get out of bed, you're not having a good day, whatever it is. But I never really complained about being Monday morning, dreading going to work, dealing with students. If you get to that point, then you maybe want to look for a different profession. But being able to enjoy the experiences that you have with those students, and there's nothing more satisfying and gratifying than watching a student get it, than looking at the students as they're growing, as they're mature, and watching them in their learning process. I mean, there's nothing more satisfying than that. And so a good teacher knows how to have fun. They know how to enjoy those experiences, and then they learn from those experiences as well. Now, all of those things, those 19 things that we just talked about, are important. I mean, the qualities of a great teacher. However, there's something that's extremely important that's probably going to trump all of those things that's missing from that list. And that is the ability to teach. Now, good teachers possess all those personal qualities and characteristics, but they really mean nothing if you are not teaching anything. And so that is where you really need to ask yourself, what is it that I'm trying to teach? What is it that I want the students to learn? And then after you've taught something, you ask yourself the question, did the students learn? How do you know that they learned? How are you assessing that learning process? And so I would always tell teachers that I would deal with and consult with, if the students look the same at the end of a unit or the end of a semester than they did when they first came into your classroom, you shouldn't get paid. You should be terminated as a teacher, because that is the goal. Understanding that there are some differences in growth and ability and skill acquisition still does not mean there's no learning that should be taking place. And so teachers need to be able to understand how to teach and to be able to evaluate the effectiveness of that teaching. And so if you've not taught, students haven't learned, you've wasted their time. So until the students are able to really successfully perform a skill on their own in a realistic setting, as a teacher, you really haven't done your job. And so that's the bottom line. That's the key, making sure that these students are learning. So keep those things in mind, and we're going to move on to talking about the history of physical education. Now remember, those 19 things that we just talked about, they are likely to show up again, so hopefully you've kind of written those down, taken some notes, and I'll have this posted online, so you'll have this as a resource for you as well. Now, thinking about the history of PE, how PE developed into what it is today, and just looking at some of the fluctuations that have occurred through instruction. It initially started back in the 1700s with a guy named Johann Friedrich, and he was identified as the first official physical education teacher, and it began in Germany because they were big on recreational activities. And some of those recreational activities included gymnastics, fencing, and horseback. They did them for fun, and Johann Friedrich introduced these to the school setting. And so students, as they were growing up, because this was something that they were expected to do as they were older, naturally needed to learn it while they were young. And so he brought this into the school system and was identified as the first PE teacher. Now, it was a few years later in the 1800s when Americans began to pick up on the fact that, wow, if we're doing these things recreationally, people are having fun, they're enjoying themselves, productivity is high, we can learn from this. And so American physical education instruction really didn't come into play, but It was beginning to be influenced by some of the teachings of Johann Friedrich. And then, in another location in Sweden, they were big on the overall exercise, so calisthenics, general body fitness and wellness and things like that. And so we have these two influences, one from Germany coming in with the emphasis on gymnastics type of activities and what the body can do, with the Swedish influences on health, wellness, fitness, just for recreational and personal gain, all influenced American physical education. And so Charles Beck took these and really brought them into the physical education setting in schools. And so he had a huge emphasis in gymnastics because he was a gymnast himself. And so he brought this to the school system, began to teach it, and we start to slowly see some improvement in life skills. So kids picked up on this, adults picked up on this, and they absolutely loved it. It was really designed for high school, and it didn't trickle down into junior high or elementary school at all, because it was mainly preparing students for adulthood and things they would do recreationally as an adult. And so in 1853, Mr. Beck lobbied for this, and Boston became the first city to make physical education instruction mandatory. And then a few years later, California picked up on that as well, realizing that physical education had some significant benefits to the overall health and wellness of individuals. And so California mandated PE in all schools. And of course, we talked about this a little bit. How is it that elementary schools and even some middle schools and high schools can get away with the decline of or the lack of physical education? Well, it kind of all goes back, in my opinion, to testing and test scores. And so around World War One, men were becoming drafted. Of course, the draft was there, and then they were realizing that men were unfit. They were out of shape. A lot of the instruction that was designed for them to be fit from the Swedish and German influences wasn't really having an effect for men who were going into the draft. And so American was like, we have to do something about this. And so then high schools began to implement a mandatory fitness preparation, which was really designed to prepare them for the draft. And so it really didn't have an instructional component. It was more so, we need to get these guys fit so when they go into the draft, they're fighting for our country, and so they need to be able to do so. So that's really where this push came from. And then in about 1929, the Great Depression hit. And at this point, the economy collapsed. There were a lot of problems, a lot of joblessness, and so we lost a lot of funding for gymnastics equipment, and so that tapered off. And so there really wasn't much instruction in physical education, simply because of the need for equipment. It just wasn't there. We couldn't fund it, couldn't resource it, and so therefore a lot of the physical education instruction tended to drop off. Then right around World War II, 1930s and 40s, new fitness-focused emphasis and curriculum began to come out of physical education instruction. And so once again, they were like, okay, we need to get back to this gymnastics and overall health and wellness push that we did several years ago, because we did see some productivity and some rise in personality and effectiveness, personally and professionally. And so we need to try to get back to this, not only for draft purposes. So when the war comes around, we're drafting nice fit men. And of course, this had nothing to do with women at the time, because the physical education curriculum was really designed for men. Women didn't really participate in that. So that was the push. We really need to have our men fit. And so right around 1953, Cross Weber developed this fitness test. And it's kind of what we now know as the fitness ground fitness test, but it was pretty much the same thing. And so they applied this fitness test to high school kids, and they realized the same test that was administered in Europe was administered in America, and they realized that Americans were still considered unfit. Only 8% of the people were identified as failing this fitness test in Europe, but over 50% was identified as failing for American students. And so this, once again, raised some red flags. And so we're back to the drawing board. What do we need to do to get these students fit, especially the men that were going into war. Well, then a year later, Brown versus Board of Education ruled segregation was unconstitutional. If you're not familiar with the Brown versus Board of Education, you need to become familiar with it, because this still impacts and influences schools, and this is really what the whole elimination of segregation was founded on. Now, with this, how does this affect physical education instruction? Well, I mentioned before that it was really for men. Well, not only was schools, the segregation of schools considered unconstitutional, it's opened up a lot of doors for women to then begin to participate in activities and games that were initially designed for men. And we'll talk more about this when we talk about Title IX, but this was huge in opening doors for women and people of color in physical education instructional as well. And so after that, we saw a lot of different approaches in physical education begin to emerge, begin to come to play. And so we first had this push on movement education, in which people were saying, you know what, just focusing on this basic skill development is important, because everyone's going to need to be able to perform basic skills throughout their life, and this is going to help transition into a lot of different other things if people chose to go into those areas. Well, that's really what movement education was. It was just education for the purposes of understanding movement, kind of where kinesiology is founded on. Then we had these perceptual motor programs, and this really combined a lot of the movement from movement education into academics, kind of what we're seeing now with Common Core, and that we're supposed to bring academic setting into physical education and vice versa. And so we then begin to see this push with the importance of learning overall with physical education in an academic setting. And then we had an approach called the conceptual learning model, and this focused on the mind. And now we're starting to see those different dimensions come into play, the different emphasis with the psychomotor, the affective, the cognitive, those things really starting to play a role in physical education instruction as well. And so we have movement education that was big, added to that with the perceptual motor programs, and then we have this focused on the cognitive development as it relates to applying these skills that we're learning. So teaching kids the basic skills, encouraging them how to apply those skills to real life setting. It's kind of a combination of these three things. Now, although each one kind of focused on its core a little bit more so, they still maintain a combination. And then we had this push on behavior, values, attitude, development. And so we're now looking at a more well-rounded physical education program. And this is, and it started off in the early 90s. And we're starting to see currently today this come back around. But basically this was the foundation of this new physical education movement, in which we wanted to help kids understand and appreciate movement just for movement's sake. We wanted them to understand teamwork. We wanted them to understand how to socialize, understand how their behavior played a role in their learning in physical education. And so these new approaches began to emerge as a result of different research and different teacher complaints that were coming out, that students were unable to apply a lot of the things that they thought were important. And then in '56, we have President Eisenhower saying, you know what, this whole push on physical education and movement and all those different approaches emerging is extremely important. I am going to form this President's Council on Youth Physical Fitness to really incorporate this as a lifestyle. So it began to become recognized from a presidential point of view as something that was extremely important. And then the presidents after that started to follow up and piggyback on it. So President Kennedy kind of reformed that and changed it around to the President's Council on Physical Fitness, because initially Eisenhower's focus was on youth and just youth physical fitness. Well, Kennedy said that, this is good for everybody, so we'll eliminate that focus on the youth and just identify physical fitness as a whole. And then President Lyndon Johnson came along to award students based on their results fitness testing as it related to these councils. And so we started to have this push and this extrinsic motivation on fitness testing, saying, you know what, if you perform at this particular level, you'll get a t-shirt, you'll get a medal, you'll be recognized. And this was an idea to motivate students to be a little bit more fit, a little bit more excited. Now we have Title IX coming along to say, you know what, we can no longer prohibit. And remember, Brown versus Board of Education eliminated the segregation for minorities in instruction. Well, this is the same for gender. So it came along and says, you know what, whatever we're providing for men as far as instruction is concerned, we need to provide for women as well. And so we can no longer discriminate against women simply on the basis of gender. And so schools began to offer coeducational programs, and this is where that huge co-ed movement really came into play. Now, some schools really kind of tiptoe the line on this, and some schools don't want to have any type of violations when it comes to Title IX, and so therefore they just make everything co-ed. So whatever you're going to teach the men, you teach the women. Other schools, and this is a debate topic, and this is one of those issues that you can address in your issues paper as well, whether or not co-ed classes are effective. Well, some schools still do this. However, they just offer the same instruction to both genders, and so you'll still have gender-separated classes. You'll have a female teacher teach the female students, and a male teacher teach the male students. And so you have the separation, but the instruction is the same. And so they're providing the same instructional ideas, skills, concepts, games, activities to both boys and girls. And then we have NASPE, which was the National Association for Sport and Physical Education. And remember these organizations. This organization was founded by physical education teachers and those who were really pro physical education. And so this began to become the hugest organization to advocate for physical activity and physical education, promoting PE at all different levels. And then we started to have some laws come into play. Here we see in 75, we see the PL 94-142, which has since been transformed, but basically this prevents the discrimination of anyone with a disability. And this affected physical education tremendously because physical education teachers were not, and still in my opinion are not, really equipped to really help students who have disabilities. And the disabilities can vary from blindness to amputees, to people in wheelchairs, to Down syndrome. It's just open to anything now. And so physical education teachers are really starting to find themselves struggling balancing large class sizes, just teaching students in general, with incorporating students with disabilities and being able to still improve their fitness and skill ability levels as well. And so this is still a tough issue for physical education teachers, which is why we have a lot of adaptive physical education programs starting to come up. And then we have a Project Spark program that was developed, and Spark is probably taken off now as one of the leading resources for physical education teachers, as they provide a variety of activities, games, lesson plans, and support training to physical education teachers. So it's real important if you can become Spark certified, and there's a few weekend workshops that you need to attend to do that. It is valuable. There's a lot of additional resources open to you and your department as a physical education teacher, or even as a school, to have a Spark certified teacher or coach at your site. And so it's good to get involved in that. Unfortunately, you have to pay for their curriculum, which is why a lot of schools refuse to do that. But I do think that it is valuable if schools have the resources to purchase it. And then we have the No Child Left Behind Act being passed, and we're still seeing some issues with this. Some teachers just refuse to really follow through with some of these guidelines. Some are still, even to this day, confused as to what those guidelines really are. But basically this really focused on emphasizing math and reading, and because of the emphasis and because of the way it was implemented, physical education programs began to, or the emphasis in physical education began to be reduced. So we took this spotlight off the importance of developing the body, developing physically educated and physically literate kids, and really focused on the academic setting of it. And so this typically eliminated PE programs altogether because funding was then allocated to different areas. Funding was taken away from physical education programs. Physical education programs weren't doing a good enough job with their own expectations, and so we began to see a decline. And then we started to see this push again come back into play. People who were advocating for physical education came in and said, you know what, we really need to get this back on board. We need to refocus everyone's effort, kind of go back to those initial emerging approaches to physical education. And so a lot of advocacy groups lobbied and came up with this Healthy People 2010. And so in about the year 2000, this initiative was pushed to encourage physical activity at every level. There was a lot of money put into this program, and the idea was to encourage more physical education at home, physical education with adults, physical education with kids, better or improved physical education instruction. And the idea was that by 2010, 10 years later, we would see a decline in obesity rates, we would see an increase in student performance, we would see all the different benefits that we knew went along with physical education instruction, and we would see it on a larger scale. Unfortunately, none of them worked. Healthy People 2010 initiative was a huge failure. They did nothing for physical education instruction. They did nothing for the obesity epidemic. They did nothing towards increasing adult activity. And so all the different pushes, all the different initiatives, all the different, the billboards and advertisement really was a flop. And so it's gone under some revisions. And now we have another one coming up that's going to be Healthy People 2020. And the idea is to reapproach some of those same problems that they've identified that they tried to address by 2010 and try to do so by 2020. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens. A few years later, 5 years later, 2005, California adopts the physical education standards. And I mentioned before that these standards were developed by practicing physical education teachers to say, you know what, these are some of the things that we've experienced. These are some of the things that we think are important that students really need to know, really need to be able to learn and do. And so the physical education standards were created from there. And we mentioned before, Common Core standards came out in 2009. And it's interesting to note that some people think that these were forced and mandated on everyone. The trick to that in California was good. The lobbyists were good about this, saying, you know what, the Common Core standards are optional. They're not mandatory. You don't have to take them. However, if you do not adopt the Common Core standards, then you will not receive any federal funding for your program. And of course, schools had to adopt it because their livelihood is based on federal funding. And so in 2009, Common Core standards were pretty much adopted by almost all schools, especially in California. And the idea was to really integrate physical education. And so we're bringing this academic component into the physical education field. And then 2011, we still see obesity. We saw this increasing even in 2000, and we see it increasing and peaking in about 2011. Obesity is at an all-time high. We are able to track the fact that obese children, 80% of those became obese adults. We are able to see that obese adults continue to be obese. They do not address their weight problems. We see a lot of different health-related problems with the increase in type 2 diabetes, heart disease, a lot of different problems, a lot of different health problems occurring because of this. And so physical education programs were then charged to help reduce this. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about obesity and everything that leads to that, but it's really unfair to ask physical education teachers to try to take this head on. There are so many other factors involved in addressing obesity. It's unfair to just expect physical education programs to be able to do it, especially with the limited resources, the limited funding, limited support that they have, with the way it's structured, with the large class sizes with one teacher. I'm expected to meet all the standards and expected to reduce this obesity epidemic. A lot of physical education teachers started to psychologically just opt out and just kind of check out, and this is where we see the roll out the balls phase, and teachers just are really frustrated with the way things are, saying, you know what, there's too many expectations placed on us, and so therefore we're just not really going to try to address anything. We're just going to let the students have fun. And we start to see this decline in instruction again, and we're seeing this cycle repeat itself. So currently, some of the important standards to address, AFER, the American Alliance on Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance, has since changed its name to SHAPE, which is the Society of Health and Physical Education and Physical Educators. And this is now becoming a replacement for NASB, a replacement for AFERT, and they are taking the lead on addressing the importance and the effectiveness of physical education instruction. They revised the standards that were initially created, and so they've come up with these new sets of standards, and these are national standards. And remember, before we'll also talk about the California state standards as well as the physical education framework, which are all three documents that really guide physical education instruction. But the national standards set the tone for what physical education should be on a national scale. And so you see there the 5 different standards. Be sure you familiarize yourself with these. We'll talk more about them, but for the time being, just kind of look at them, think about what they really mean. We'll do some more investigation a little bit later, and you'll have your standards reflection papers as well for each one of these, one at a time. But the national standards set this broad umbrella, and then each state is able to then adopt standards that are unique for each state based on these. And so there should be this natural alignment between what each state is doing at the school district level with the overall national standards. And so this is what we've come to. This is kind of where physical education is right now. We've seen a lot of different changes. We see a lot of different theories, approaches emerging, what's important, what should be addressed, what can be addressed, the different struggles physical education teachers have. And so that just provides you with a real general history of how physical education was founded here in America and what we're trying to do with it now. And so right now, it's really kind of the stagnant thing. Everyone knows that physical activity is important, and so physical activity in itself has now become more of the emphasis rather than physical education instruction. So rather than teaching kids how to move, teaching kids the basic skills, it's just, let's just be active. Just do something, ride a bike, go for a walk, go for a jog, get involved in some exercise, get involved in some sport activity. And that has really become the push because of the obesity epidemic that we're still seeing problems with. And so think about all of the changes that have been in place, the way history has taken us now, and where do you think physical education is going to be 5-10 years from now? You're the future. As prospective teachers in this field, hopefully you are able to identify what's going to be effective instructionally for students, what's going to be important for them, and really work on being a good quality professional in the field. Not just a physical education teacher, but a good educator, period. So that's it for now. If you have any questions on any of this stuff, feel free to ask. You can shoot me an email. I emailed you my cell number as well, so you can send me a text. If no questions, I'll see you guys on Thursday. Take care.